Location, location, location. That's what Barbados and the islands of the Lesser Antilles had going in their favor in the days of sail. If you look at the ocean currents in the major oceans in the world, you'll see the North Atlantic gyre. This is the natural movement of the currents across the North Atlantic. In the South Atlantic, this is how they move. In the Pacific, there's a North Pacific gyre and the South Pacific gyre. And in the Indian Ocean also, there's a gyre as well. So you can cross the Indian Ocean in a sailing ship this way and return that way. You can cross the Atlantic this way and return that way. Today, people row across the Atlantic days. There's an added benefit as well. It's the westerlies. These are the northeast trade winds, which, as far as the North Atlantic is concerned, will drive a sailing ship this way. It doesn't come straight across here, it comes in this direction. So Barbados was favored by its location, and it was a hub for trade with the eastern seaboard of America as that grew in population. 13 colonies, a growing population. Source of manufactured goods, source of lumber, fish, all sorts of things to resupply the growing colony of Barbados. It's not as easy coming against the Gulf Stream and having to tack into the wind to get here, but hey, it's relatively short. So Barbados was ideally located for trade, and that's what made it successful. This North Atlantic gyre, this diagram comes from Site Online. It has a Creative Commons license, so I'm using this to show how important trade was to the what is known today as the Atlantic world. Slaves could be taken easily from here. Obviously, to get to Guinea, get to the Gold Coast here, it's more difficult. But then once the slaves are loaded, the ships have no problem coming across here. But I'm going to show you also as the talk goes on that pretty soon Barbadians did not need a supply of slaves from Africa. The simple numbers are, when the census was done in 1680, there were 40,000 Negroes or slaves in Barbados. They're described as Negroes. In 1817, when the slave returns for the British overseas dependencies, all online, they're available for you to check, were made. Barbados had 77,000 slaves in 1817. So by 1834, probably around 80,000. So Barbados was actually well supplied with labor, oversupplied, if anything, with labor. But this trade made the economy, completed the economy. Sugar alone could never have sustained it. This trade was probably 9 times as high as any output in sugar in terms of tons. This is the trade that created the wealth that the Quakers acquired. With wealth, basic Christianity is abandoned. And that's what happened with many of the Quakers. They went back to the Church of England. We'll deal with that also in a later video. You can find a letter from 1760 or so, uh, where Quaker property is itemized and the drop in the number of Quakers is addressed. Jamaica also had Quakers, but their fall was more precipitous than Barbados. So you can actually see the rise and fall of Quakerism in Barbados, determined by this current, winds, sugar. So what was the population? How did the population grow on this eastern seaboard of America in time up to 1680? That would justify what I'm saying. We'll look at that in a moment. We're going to use an internet, a website, a Wikipedia, if you believe that. So I'm happy with the numbers though. So we'll look at that for a moment and see next and see what it's like. If we wanted to know how the population of America grew in the early days of its existence, we could go to Wikipedia and look at the demographic history of the United States. It's online. There you will find a table showing how the population grew from 1610 onwards. We had a census done in Barbados in 1680. So between 1610 and 1680, according to this table, the population in in America grew tremendously. So its demand, the market demand grew. So that is a magnet for merchants, manufacturers, providers of service, entrepreneurs. It's just a magnet. In 1607, the Virginia colony was settled. It had its ups and downs. In 1620, the Mayflower arrived in New England, founded a colony at Plymouth Rock. Between 1610 and 1620, the Virginian colony is growing. So the population in America has increased. Between 1620 and 1630, when the Massachusetts Bay colony was formed, the Virginian colony grew and the Plymouth Rock colony grew. So now you have three colonies: Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth Rock, and Virginia. This explosion in population occurs because before the Quakers came on the scene, long before, in fact, George Fox was born in 1624, the Puritans were being persecuted and were fleeing England for not only religious reasons, but also economic reasons. The Great Puritan Migration, again, you can Google that, have a look at that. So it was responsible for this explosion up to 1650. It ended like at the beginning of the Civil War in England, 1642, but by 1650, there are 50,000 people in America. Huge market, huge. I've shown you the currents and the trade winds already. How would these people get to America safely? The Mayflower crossed directly from Plymouth in England to Plymouth Rock in America. It took them 66 days. They went against the Gulf Stream, against the westerlies. So it took them a long time. So obviously, they had to carry a lot of supplies. Water alone is really heavy. And for 66 days, that's several tons. So how would a merchant using that direct route load his ships with sufficient cargo for sale to make a profit? The answer is to break the journey in the Leewards. So the first island colonized in the Leewards was St. Christopher. St. Christopher, or St. Kitts, doesn't get its name by chance. St. Christopher is the patron saint of travelers. So if you've got this great Puritan migration going on in this period, every little help counts. So the population in America provided the market which required the growth of the merchants, of the merchant class. The Quakers filled that class because the Quakers would not go in the army after the Civil War. A lot of the Civil War veterans became Quakers. And that's probably why you'll find so many colonels and generals and majors and captains in Barbados at the time. They were men of rank, of training, highly disciplined, highly focused, very able to make Barbados grow. But the Quakers wouldn't go in the army. They wouldn't go in the navy. They couldn't go into parliament because they wouldn't take the oath of allegiance. Where would they go? They're being persecuted. They have to pay fines. They have to make money. Where would they go? The answer is they went into business, and they did it so well that they prospered. Perhaps God prospered them, because after all, what are they doing? They are the first evangelical Christians, and they're spreading God's word. So God might very well look favorably on them. So they do very, very well in business. we find Lloyd's of London is the shipping has increased. So by I think in the 1680s, Lloyd's of London comes into being. It comes into being in a Quaker tea house. Insurance for these ships was important, and it exists to this day. The fact that trade is or was the most vital part of the economy is easily borne out by looking at what the most profitable company was, and that was the Dutch East India Company. It had its own army, its own navy. It was quite separate from the government of Holland. It was prosperous and it made loads of money because it was dealing in products where death was the norm across vast oceans. So they were being paid according to the risks that were being taken and according to the value of the product that they were bringing. So they, so the profit was made not only in the actual product, but it's also made in the service that was provided. I'm going to show you that Henry Drax fitted in the Society of Friends, and that the Society of Friends, many of them were merchants and traders, and that besides his plantation in Barbados, which would have been important because it would have allowed the ships of the merchants and traders to be reprovisioned when their journey was broken in Barbados. Plantation was not the be all and end all of his existence. In fact, what you'll see is that in his will he says he will leave land to his nephews, wants to change their name to Drax. His executors in England, you'll see, are very powerful names. One of them is a baronet. So he has a business that's going on besides the growing of sugar. We consider the growing of sugar to be so important, but it's just a cog in the wheel of a much bigger enterprise. Why did Drax leave the land to his nephews if they change their name to Drax? Because Drax's sons, four of them, died early. They died without wills, they died without being married. They had there's no line for Drax to leave his land in Barbados. Where those four sons are buried is a question worth asking. And as we will see, they're probably buried on Drax Hall Plantation. Henry Drax died in England sometime between when he wrote his will in 1682 and when it was probated in 1683. He asked to be buried in the vault of St. John's Church in London, where his father and mother and other relations were interred. Henry Drax had four sons, all of whom died young. There's no record of any will I could find for them, for any of them. They also died unmarried. It doesn't help that the St. George Parish Register for burials contains no entry prior to 1800. It begins at 1800. It's as though, okay, it could be that the register was destroyed or eaten by termites, but it could also be that St. George Parish Church did not have too many congregants. They were all Quakers. Whatever the reason, where were these four sons buried? Look at something else funny about Henry Drax. He talks with his godchildren, Christopher Codrington. This would be the third generation, the one who left his estates to the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. Elizabeth Codrington and Dorothy Codrington are presumably his sisters, their nephews and nieces. He names friends: Sir Walter St. John's Barnet, John Baldwin of London, merchant. You see the merchant connection again? Shipping, moving goods. Sir Walter St. John's Barnet there. Hugh Franklin, gentleman of Staples in London, and cousin Abraham Jackson. These are the executors in England. So it sounds like all of these men live in England. Then he starts naming friends here: Christopher Codrington, John Codrington. Christopher Codrington would be the second generation, the father to the Christopher Codrington who left his estates to the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in foreign parts. These are brothers. Richard Guy is a Quaker merchant. He works with another Quaker merchant called um, Howell. I can't remember his first name. Samuel Newton is at Newton Plantation, and John Holizel is at Holizel Plantation. So we can mark these onto the map and add them to the growing number of Quakers at the time of the census in 1680. He names his mothers-in-law. Um, what does he do here? Does he have a cousin? I think I saw somewhere that he had a cousin called Christopher Codrington, which would be number two. Not seeing that right now. Must be another will I saw it in. This family here is an interesting family. His sister is Elizabeth Shetterden, and she has five younger children. And he lists them: Meliora, Drax, Elizabeth, Henry, and Dorothy. He has another sister, but this is the family I would like to talk a little bit about because Henry Drax lost all four of his sons. So he had no one to pass an inheritance to. So what he did was he named his nephews, provided that they changed their name to Drax. So the Drax says that we know today, Jane, and about whom there's much controversy, come from Henry Drax's sister. And both of them, his sister and him, come from James Drax, who started who first came to Barbados, I think in 1627 or something like that. Very, very early. You can check it on the internet. Okay, so let us now look at some genealogy. You see how these wills help. If you're missing large swaths of time in the parish register, the only way to get at a genealogy for some families in Barbados is through your wills. St. Lucy is bad. St. Peter is bad. St. James is bad. St. George is bad. A lot of them are. A lot of them are missing missing records, and those records would be in the Quaker meeting minutes, but unfortunately, they're not to be found. If you look on this page and see if how many friends you can see, no friends, no friends. See merchant again. Everybody is connected to a merchant or friend. Quakers were a lot of Quakers were merchants. Friend Francis Bell, Drinkmint. Robert Drinkmint has a friend. Okay, and Drury, D-R-U-R-Y, because there's also a D-U-R-Y from St. Peter. He was also a Quaker, but this one does not seem to have a friend, or does not seem to be a member of the Society of Friends. So you have four names here. Two of them are Quakers, and they also name friends. So you end up with a lot more friends than the original, than Jesse's two. So now let's look at the genealogy for Henry Drax. Now let's look at the descendants of the Drax Codrington families. Drax married Mary Lapworth, had a daughter, Francis Drax, and a son, James Drax. This son came to Barbados. His daughter married Christopher Codrington the First. He came to Barbados. He is the grandfather of Sir Christopher Codrington the Third, who would have left his estates to the SPG, the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts. James Drax also did well. Both of them are involved in trade as well as sugar. So it's not only sugar that is actually going to give them wealth. Trade will. So James Drax passes to his son Henry Drax, Drax Hall. Henry Drax marries first Frances Tufton, and they produce four sons, all of whom died young. So he does not have anyone to pass what he got from his father to. So his father also had other children. Elizabeth Drax is his sister, was his sister. She married a Shatterton, I don't know what his name is, and they produced sons and daughters. So Henry Drax chose these nephews to say, if you change your name to Drax, I'll give you land. And they did. So that's what happened with Drax Hall. Still comes from Drax, James Drax, but it comes through this, strictly speaking, this way, or rather this way, and also through help by this way, through Elizabeth Drax. Interesting. Never knew the Draxes and the Codringtons were cousins and related like this. But learn something new every day. Now let's look at the maps. Henry Drax. We just looked at his will. You can see from the will that he really must have been a powerful man through his connections. Not through sugar, but through his connections, merchant and otherwise. If you look at if you look at it, he's connected to Howell and Guy. That's one, two, three Howell and Guys, four Howell and Guys. They're merchants. They're basically controlling a lot of the trade into and out of Bridgetown and into and out of probably Skeets Bay up here. He's connected to Christopher Codrington. Beg your pardon. He's connected to Christopher Codrington here. We'll zoom in closer and get it right. Who also has, through Concepts Bay, a way to the outside world. Connected to another Codrington, John Codrington, who is also described as his friend. I believe he is the brother to Christopher Codrington. He's at Codrington in St. Michael. He's described as Codrington Jr. So all of these are probably, for sure, to our merchants. If you look at these closer, I was telling you wrong. This is actually Howell and Guy. That's at the Bell Plantation. This is Codrington Jr. over here, or Richard Codrington. Sorry, John Codrington, the brother to Christopher Codrington. They are on the roads out of town and into town. They are collecting produce for reprovisioning ships. And when the crop season is on, they'll bring sugar into town for sale to the ships. So if I were to turn on the, we won't do that yet. Here is Drax Hall, and also Drax Hope. What is the significance of hope? If all these men are Quakers, it means they're religious. So when you see hope, you're thinking in terms of what does hope have to do with the Bible? And what does it have to do with the Bible? We'll look at a site and see what it has to do with the Bible. But for the moment, with the Bible. So for the moment, we'll just look at other connections. So here you go. He comes down to Newton, Samuel Newton. So that's Newton Plantation in Christchurch. Come up here. You'll see he goes to Howell and Guy. He's connected to Christopher Codrington. Howell and Guy are probably have an outlet through Skeets Bay. Codrington has an outlet through Concepts Bay, what was known as Codrington Bay. You'll see also is connected to England through four of his executors, one of whom is identified as a merchant. Connected also to Howell and Guy over here, very close to Gollop, who is connected to Penn, Pennsylvania. He's also connected to Huddersfield. There are two Huddersfields here. There's a Huddersfield plantation. This is probably the pool. And then there's another version, Huddersfield, which would be Huddersfield Plantation proper, where the old mill is. This would be Four Roads. Sorry, that may not be Four Roads. That may, yeah, let's see if it has Four Roads. No, because this is actually, okay, this road here is the road below, Pool Woods. There's a Cart Road. So this is where Four Roads were. It comes up the hill here by the old mill, and it goes out down Malvern Cutting to the sea, Tent Bay. So this is a really important trade route. This is a favorite hiking route for the National Trust hikes when I was there. There's a whole network of roads, not roads, or tracks under the cliff. And there are many people living under the cliff. This is Foster Hall. This would be probably Mount Baker's. We'll see. So you see this 1675 will make 1675 map makes a lot of sense, and you can actually link what was there to what is there now. That is big. Now we're gonna basically pause for a minute while I turn on the names just to confirm what I'm telling you. Okay, I've put on the names. I'm going to take off the 1675 map so you can see that's what Google Earth or it's called Esri imagery looks like. So let's turn that off. There you have, if you were just to look at, zoom out a little bit so getting everybody. Oh no, gets a little too cluttered then. Plus, zoom in here. Right. So Samuel Newton, Howland Guy, Codrington, that's a Howland Guy. For some reason I didn't put him in. Drax, Henry Drax, It's Drax Hope now. This is Howland Guy out here by Gollop, Howland, Codrington, Howland Guy. I gotta put him in too. And then the persons in England. Sir Walter St. John's, Baronet. Ooh, important guy. John Bawden of London, merchant. Hugh Frankland, his cousin, Henry Drax's cousin. And Abraham Jackson, also a cousin in England. So family is very much involved in this business venture, in this networking. Quakers are important. They trust one another so they can do business easily together. That's how Drax fits in to the Quaker network.